social networks. Among his friends and members of his community, the Marianos appeared to be an exemplary and perfect family, united by God. Or that was what everyone believed. On October 24th, 2023, Sara Mariano. She was waiting for a car that would pick her up at the door of her house, located in the municipality of Salvador de Bahia, in Brazil. Supposedly, she had a women's meeting at a church that day. Around 9:30 p.m., a car horn sounded throughout the family's house, as if warning them that it was time to leave. Sarah said goodbye to her little daughter, her husband, and got into the vehicle that had been sent by the church. The meeting would take no more than a few hours, but Sarah had not returned home since that night. Desperate, her husband Ederland reported her disappearance to the police, and they quickly began an arduous search for her. The media and social networks were filled with photos of Sarah and her husband. He cried live, begging for his wife to return safely. But something about Ederland's story didn't add up. That night, the supposed women's meeting never happened. What really happened to Sara Mariano? Did your husband have anything to do with it? Sarah was engaged to another boy, but as soon as she met Ederland, she decided to leave him. Her love affair with Ederland began over the internet. They spent long hours talking well into the night. One day, the young man wanted the long-distance relationship to go one step further and paid him to buy a plane ticket to El Salvador. Sarah's mother was worried about her daughter. Something about this man didn't convince her. She could feel Ederland's voice in the audios. It sounded like a monster. And 13 years later, I would discover that I wasn't too wrong. But Sarah didn't listen to her mother's concerns and the one-way trip to El Salvador. He never had a return ticket. That's how they got married. They had a daughter and created their own church on Estrada das Barreiras called Assembly of God. There Sarah was a pastor and gospel singer over the years. Sarah discovered her passion for music. His voice was unique, and he had no problem reaching the highest notes and captivating everyone with his angelic harmony when he intoned the stanzas of religious songs. Her musical career developed in partnership with her husband, who also became her producer. But not only did he sing for weekly meetings at his church, the couple also ran an internet channel called TV Shalom that produced content aimed at the evangelical audience. There he posted videos of singing, sermons, and moments of praise in church. The singer was also very influential on social media, reaching more than 100,000 followers on Instagram and over 10,000 subscribers on her YouTube channel. Seeing the great impact it had, Sarah released her first album, which would also be her last. Your routine. In recent years, it has been divided between religious services, rehearsals and singing, taking care of her daughter and husband, recording videos for the internet, going to the gym and tidying the house. Everything was perfect in his life. Even their closest acquaintances admired and envied the exemplary relationship they had as a couple. But not everything was as it seemed. The pastor had been venting to her family and friends at church about something that was beginning to worry her. She didn't trust her husband's temper, it turned out. The postcard perfect image of the Marianos was a screen to cover up what was really going on inside doors. In reality, Ederland was a very aggressive man with his wife, to the point of insulting her and forcing her to have sex. The coexistence had become unbearable, and days before her disappearance, Sarah had told her mother that she had something important to reveal to her the next time they met, unfortunately. The woman never knew that this was what Sarah was going to confess to her, because days later, her daughter would be returned to her arms, lifeless and silenced forever. When the gospel singer did not return home, Ederland immediately reported her missing. In his first statement to police, He said he did not know the name of the church he had attended that night. Besides, according to him, Sarah did not receive formal payments for participating in churches, but voluntary offerings from members, which complicated monitoring by the authorities. Ederland reported that Sarah had the habit of participating in various religious events, and that night was no exception. When the hours passed without any signal, he tried to contact her without success. According to him, Sarah never notified him of her arrival at the event. The police launched an investigation into the disappearance, and he questioned family and friends to try to locate Sarah as soon as possible. Time was crucial to finding the singer alive. No one had any idea that by then Sarah was no longer on this plane. Her husband mobilized the search both in the press and on social media, where he expressed his pain and faith that God would help her find her way home. Ederland even recorded a video with her daughter in tears, asking for help in locating Sarah. But his attempts to appear distressed by the disappearance were in vain. His feigned pain was not enough to convince the singer's family. The mother questioned the fact that the subject did not know in which church the event had taken place, so Sarah's sister confronted her brother-in-law. He blamed him for not knowing where his wife was going, not even the address. The man maintained that he only knew in which city the event would take place. Something did not add up, and their suspicions finally came true. When 3 days later, on October 27th, the police found a body in a wooded area on the side of Highway VA93 in the Diaz Avila region, just a few minutes from the Mariano home. Before them was a horrible image. A woman's body lay charred, and even the head was completely burned beyond recognition. Identification was only possible thanks to the objects found next to the victim. It was Ederland himself who recognized his wife's body from a slipper and the singer's wedding ring. The public reactions were not long in coming, and even photos of the find were broadcast on the internet. Users found the forensic photographs of the shepherd on the Zacarias portal, a website that publishes news from Brazil without censorship, with shocking images or videos. However, the authorities publicly asked not to share these images out of respect for the victim. Continued dissemination of such material is an offense punishable by up to 10 years APOS, imprisonment in that country. The family was devastated not only by the singer's painful outcome, but by the brutal way in which they had ended her life. They couldn't help wondering who would do such a thing to the woman. A man hovered over their heads, Ederland Mariano. Upon learning of the horrible news, a pastor and friend of the victim immediately went to the city police station and reported that on the night of Sarah's disappearance, there had been no event in the city's churches. On the other hand, the singer's sister, Soraya Corella. She released an audio in which the singer told her that her husband wanted to buy a gun. In the audio, Sarah could be heard saying that if he is her husband, he was a violent and destructive person. Without a gun, he would be even more so with one in his possession. The woman had openly confessed to her sister that she did not trust him, and that she had been considering divorce. The singer's mother said her daughter told her about several fights she had with her husband before disappearing. She even told her, "Mom, I'm going to make a decision that I didn't want to make because I spoke before God until death do us part, but it's impossible." Sarah was afraid that she would not fulfill what she had sworn on her wedding day, not knowing that her own husband would break this promise. With these statements, the police arrested Ederland Mariano on the same day. The body was found as the main suspect in Sarah's crime at the beginning. He denied having anything to do with the events, but when the police showed him that they had evidence that he had tried to delete information from his wife's phone, he collapsed in front of the authorities amid tears. The subject confessed to the murder of his wife, but far from the case being solved, things were about to get darker. The man had not acted, only Ederland, who had accomplices and had been planning to get rid of his wife for a month. While the suspect was in prison, the authorities began the search for the others involved in the crime, who would little by little fall like dominoes. It was the owner of the car in which Sarah was last seen, who approached the police to inspect the vehicle. The man confessed to having nothing to do with it, although the car was his property, and stated that he had lent the car to a neighbor named Gideon the same night of the crime. According to the owner of the vehicle, Gideon had asked him to borrow the car, which he refused since he had had problems in the past with that subject. But the suspect insisted that his car had broken down and he needed to pick up a passenger who had already requested the ride. Finally, the owner of the vehicle surrendered and handed over the car to him without knowing that it would become evidence of a brutal crime. The police arrested Gideon as a second suspect in the murder, but he would not be the last. A subject named Victor Gabriel also spontaneously showed up at the police station and confessed that he was involved in Sarah's case. He attended the same church and claimed to be a friend of the bishop, whom he pointed directly to as an accomplice in the criminal plan. The police then arrested Bishop Sadoki, who worked in evangelical churches and was exchanging affectionate messages with the victim on social media when all the detainees were confronted. The men confessed that the order to get rid of the singer had been given by Mariano, the intellectual author of the crime. Bishop Sadoki, the driver of the car, Gedeon Duarte, and Victor Gabriel, the third accomplice, testified that they had received from Ederland a total of about 2,000 reais, equivalent to about $400, as payment for murdering his wife. The detainees detailed the plan step by step. First, Gideon took Gabriel and Sadoki to the scene of the crime and shortly thereafter went to pick up Sarah at his house as if he were the driver of a taxi app. Once Sarah got into the car, Gideon drove down a deserted road until he pulled over to the side and pretended to have a mechanical failure. There, Victor and Sadoki came out of their hiding place and approached Sarah, surprising her from behind. Bishop Sadoki dragged the singer into the dark forest. As she screamed and struggled to break free, she fought tirelessly with her kidnapper in the hope of escaping or that someone would hear them. But it was in vain because at that moment Victor took her by the arms to stop fighting. And it was then that the bishop stabbed Sarah with a knife that ended instantly with his life. After the crime, the two returned to the vehicle where Gideon was waiting. They changed their clothes to eliminate evidence of the terrible act they had just committed and headed to Ederland's house, where they handed over Sarah's cell phone as evidence of having fulfilled their part of the plan. Only then did they receive the agreed money. Shortly after, the driver left everyone at a condominium and headed to his house. He also returned the car that had been loaned to him 2 days later. Sarah's disappearance had made quite a splash in the media, so her husband feared the body would be found. Frightened, he ordered his accomplices to reassemble at the scene to hide the body and promised them even more money. In return, Gideon, Victor, and Sadoki returned to the scene to hide the body. They bought gasoline and tried to set him on fire until he was nothing but ashes. But after the failed attempt to burn the body, which was only partially carbonized, they left the place believing that would be enough. Sadoki and Gideon were arrested, as was Hederland Mariano. On the other hand, Victor Gabriel was released while the investigation continued because there was no arrest warrant against him. Another man, a religious singer, was mentioned in everyone's statements, but according to those involved, he did not participate directly in the crime, although he knew the plan, and he received 200 reais, about $40, as a courtesy for the police to keep. He is still investigating the case to understand the motives for the murder. The strongest theory that Ederland's plan began when he discovered an alleged betrayal by Sarah. The man would not have endured that infidelity, and that is why he sent the hitmen to get rid of his wife as revenge. On November 29, 2023, the hearing began that will decide whether custody of their daughter will be for the maternal family or instead, it will remain with her paternal grandparents. The 11-year-old girl gave a special statement at the Child and Adolescent Crime Suppression Station and expressed that she did not know what happened. She was aware that her father was in prison, but maintained that he is innocent and that her mother is in heaven. Sarah's daughter. He is currently in the custody of his father's family and in the midst of a legal bid between his immediate relatives. The maternal family was waiting for an opinion from the Public Ministry of Bahia that would be favorable to suspend the power of the Ederland family, because on the paternal side, they prevented the girl from having contact with her maternal family. As investigations progress, an autopsy is expected to find out if the charring of Sarah's body occurred before, during, or after the death, and even to know if there were other crimes such as asphyxiation, bodily harm, whether it was shot with a firearm or it was a stabbing. This review may take time, and this information has not yet been revealed. 5 months after the crime, there is still no date for the trial against the 4 detainees. Authorities are still collecting evidence and even believe there could be more people involved. From Sarah's family and friends, Ederland is a monster who pretended to be a good husband and father to maintain his reputation in the community, something the couple had achieved through the woman's hard work. The family still can't understand why Ederland took her life, and now they just want him and his accomplices to pay for the atrocity. The hope is that none will be released, so Sarah can finally rest in peace. How many more women will have to perish to uphold the myth of the perfect family? While the news is sad, it is not surprising. This is not the first case of this nature. Another woman named Carolini was murdered by her husband a few months before Sarah, and whose religious beliefs prevented her from seeking help and distancing herself from her attacker. In 2023, 3 femicides were reported during the end-of-year holidays, which shocked precisely because they were committed in the midst of the largest family and religious celebration in Brazil. Christmas goes on for years and the violence seems to be endless, a country that has almost 90% of its population Christian, which says it values the traditional family model, is also the 5th country in the world in the number of femicides. The vast majority of cases are the husbands themselves who murder their wives. They are respectable men, apparently good, socially prestigious, and whose doors inside are the reincarnation of the devil. Brazil records at least 1 report of violence against women per minute. The figures are scary, but the reality may be even harsher. The lack of complaints is a problem. Many women remain silent. Although there are different channels to report due to lack of information or fear, many cases are not registered, leaving the victim exposed to continuing situations of physical, psychological, intimate, patrimonial, and moral violence. Let's hope that Sarah's case does not become one more of a seemingly endless list that is increasing at a ferocious pace.